Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're tackling something pretty fundamental, I think.
Yeah, a really core question.
Right. When you look at movements like Islamism,
Right.
those advocating for a return to religious roots in politics,
hmm
how much of that ideology, even with all the anti-Western talk, is actually, well, a product of the West itself, like colonialism, nationalism?
And even specific racial ideas, which is maybe the most surprising part.
Exactly.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? We're looking at modern Islamic thought, say, from the late 19th century onwards.
Focusing on the Middle East, South Asia mainly.
That's right. Key thinkers, key movements. And the goal is, well, to see how that big encounter with the West really changed how Muslims thought about, religion, the nation,
And the state
the
itself.
state itself. Yeah,
Because the sources we've looked at, they point to this real paradox.
it is a paradox.
Many of these movements, they've actually absorbed core Western concepts, especially the nation state being paramount.
The nation state, absolutely. And maybe even more startlingly, these racial hierarchies that actually came out of 19th century European language studies,
Philology.
right? Philology. So the very tools they're using to build an identity against the West.
Are borrowed from the West. It's fascinating.
Okay, so let's dig into that first point, the intellectual shift. Where did this begin?
Well, it really kicks off in the late 19th century. The colonial encounter, as you said, was huge.
Because the critique from Western powers was pretty harsh, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That Islam was somehow backward.
Exactly. Incompatible with modern life. Outdated, not civilized. That was the narrative.
So Islamic thinkers felt they had to respond,
Yeah.
to defend the faith.
Precisely. They needed to reconcile Islam with what they called modern needs. And this led to a really interesting move, something scholars call detextualization.
Detextualization. Okay, what does that mean in practice? Moving away from the actual texts.
Sort of, yeah. It was a strategic shift away from relying solely on, the canonical scriptures or centuries of legal rulings.
Towards what then? Towards something they called the totalizing spirit of Islam, a kind of underlying essence.
The spirit. That sounds flexible.
It was flexible, extremely. If a specific text or a traditional ruling clashed with modern ideas like, say, equality or certain social norms, a thinker could argue it wasn't in line with the true spirit of Islam.
Ah, I see. So it gave reformers, maybe even lay people, a way to reinterpret things.
Exactly. It let them sidestep potentially problematic traditions without directly rejecting the faith itself.
So who were the key figures pushing this idea?
Well, one name that comes up a lot is Syed Amir Ali, an Indian thinker. His book from 1891, The Spirit of Islam, was apparently quite influential.
The spirit of Islam. The title says it all, really.
It does, and the sources say he explicitly accused older scholars of focusing too much on the letter of the law and missing the spirit.
Okay, so that's the theory. Can we see it having real-world effects, like specific examples?
Oh, absolutely. And you can see the pressure from Europe directly influencing interpretations. There's a really striking example from the Ottoman Empire, early 20th century.
Okay.
A scholar named Mansurazad Mehmed Said, he argued for banning polygamy.
Right. But was his argument based on traditional Islamic legal reasoning?
Not primarily, no.
Yeah.
His main point was that polygamy and the Sharia in general faced, and I'm quoting here, a great deal of criticism on the part of Europeans and civilized peoples.
Wow. So he was explicitly saying, we need to change this because Europeans don't like it.
Pretty much. It shows that the drive wasn't just internal theological debate, it was a reaction to external modern Western pressure, reconciling with their sensibilities.
Okay, so they start reinterpreting personal laws to meet these modern demands. Does that then lead them to think about political power? Like, if the laws are vulnerable, maybe the whole system needs defending?
That's exactly the connection. The colonial experience made it clear. Weakness in law or custom was seen as political weakness.
Right. You can't defend the faith without controlling the political structure that governs it.
Precisely. So the goal shifts. For many Islamists, the ultimate aim becomes achieving a truly Islamic life. But the vehicle for that is establishing an Islamic state.
And that right there elevates the state to a whole new level, doesn't it? It's not just administration, it's the guarantor of religious life.
It becomes the ultimate source of legitimacy, which is inherently a modern nationalistic idea, even if the goal is framed universally.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the state then becomes the interpreter. It decides what fits the spirit.
Yes, the state almost becomes a modern mujtahid, the supreme interpreter. It can rule in the name of God, but also sideline specific divine laws if they conflict with, say, state interests or modern necessity.
The sanctity of the state.
That's the phrase. The state's survival and power become paramount.
Okay, the sources apparently draw a parallel here that seems unlikely at first glance between Khomeini and Ataturk.
I know, right? Seems totally counterintuitive. The leader of the Islamic revelation and the arch-secularist founder of modern Turkey.
How can they possibly agree on a fundamental Islamic principle?
Because the principle they agreed on wasn't necessarily about traditional theology. It was about the modern nation-state. Both saw establishing and maintaining the state as the highest obligation.
Really? Both of them?
Yes. Look at the timing, even though decades apart. In 1924, Ataturk is quoted saying the state, quote, in its true Islamic sense, is the only institution whose establishment is obligatory.
Obligatory. Wow. Okay. And Khomeini?
In 1987, he basically echoes this, saying the state is the first order of Islamic law and precedes all other secondary rules.
So for both, the state comes first, before other religious rules even.
It shows how deeply ingrained the idea of state sovereignty had become across the political spectrum. Secular or religious, the modern state was supreme.
And once you have that state, that defined territory, what happens to the idea of the Ummah, the borderless community of all Muslims?
Well, it essentially hits a wall. Literally. The national border.
It has to, doesn't it? A state, by definition, is limited. It has citizens and non-citizens.
Exactly. It's inherently exclusionary.
Yeah.
So even in an Islamic state, just being Muslim isn't enough for full rights or citizenship. Your nationality matters more.
And we see examples of this.
Yeah, the sources mention reports about Afghan Muslim refugees in Iran, fellow Muslims, fellow Shiites often,
Right.
but facing discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Being banned from public parks in places like Isfahan simply because they lacked Iranian citizenship.
So the national identity trumped the shared religious identity.
Clearly, the flag comes before the face, in practice.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the weirdest part.
Mm-hmm.
The internalization of Western racial ideas.
Yeah, this one is pretty startling. We're talking specifically about the Aryan-Semitic divide.
Which, as you said, came from European linguistics, trying to categorize languages, not exactly solid science, let alone applicable to entire peoples.
Not at all. It was 18th, 19th century philology, William Jones, Friedrich Schlegel, that morphed into racial theory. But the key is how it got into Islamic discourse.
Through colonialism, education, translated text.
Exactly. Colonial education systems, imported Orientalist scholarship, and then major Islamist thinkers actually started using this framework.
Using it for what?
To define true Islam, to argue about who was racially or ethnically better suited to lead or interpret Islam.
So they created competing racial claims within Islam based on a Western model.
Precisely. On one side, you have figures like Ali Shariati in Iran, hugely influential thinker before the revolution.
And he leaned into the Aryan side.
Heavily. He was a strong Persian nationalist. He talked about the Iranian nation existing for millennia. He even framed Shi'ism as this unique blend, the crossroad of the Aryan and Semitic spirits.
Wow. And did this lead to, well, racist rhetoric against other Muslims?
Oh, absolutely. The sources quote some really shocking things from Shariati. He essentially argued that Arabs lacked the mental capacity to truly grasp Islam. Yeah. Describing their world as just of swords, of plunder, of enslaved people, of camels. He argued Islam only progressed because it entered the Aryan soul of Iran, shedding its Semitic origins.
That's incredibly divisive language between Muslim groups. And you're saying the root is this imported European racial framework.
The sources strongly suggest that link, yes. Once you accept racial determinism, you have to pick a side to claim superiority. Shariati picked the supposed Aryan element for Persian culture.
Okay, so that's a Persian Aryan view. What's the counter-argument using the same framework?
Well, you see the Arab perspective articulated by thinkers like Muhammad Imara in Egypt.
And he argued the opposite, that Arabs were superior.
Essentially, yes. He argued Islam is fundamentally an Arab religion, al-Araba, he called it. Arabs were privileged because they were the pioneers.
So for him, when non-Arabs gained influence,
that marked the decline of authentic Islam. He pinpointed the mid-9th century, when Arab dominance started to wane, as the beginning of Islam's corruption by non-Arabs.
So both Shariati and Imara are using the exact same borrowed Western racial binary
to claim ethnic superiority for their own group and define pure Islam based on national origin. It's a profound internalization.
And this isn't just abstract intellectual stuff, right? This national focus plays out in actual government policy.
Definitely. One source calls it banal nationalism in action. You see Islamist states acting just like secular ones when it comes down to national interest.
Domestically first, how does that look?
Well, the Islamic Republic of Iran is a key example. Look at the Constitution.
Contradictions.
Big ones. Article 19 supposedly prohibits discrimination. But Article 15 makes Farsi the only official language for schooling in government.
Which automatically disadvantages other language groups within Iran.
Leads directly to linguistic discrimination, yeah. The sources mention the case of Zahra Mohammadi, a Kurdish teacher jailed just for teaching Kurdish voluntarily.
And it goes right to the top, doesn't it? The requirements for president.
Right. The Constitution says the president must be Irani al-Als of Iranian descent and Shiite.
So not just Muslim, not just Iranian citizen, but ethnically Persian and religiously Shiite.
It confirms it's fundamentally an exclusionary ethno-national state, despite the Islamic title.
Okay, and what about foreign policy? Does the Ummah solidarity hold up there?
Almost never, when state interests conflict. The sources point to the treatment of persecuted Muslim minorities globally.
Like the Uyghurs in China or the Rohingya in Myanmar.
Exactly. Look at Turkey and Iran's relationship with China.
Both need China economically or strategically.
Very much so. President Erdogan of Turkey initially called the treatment of Uyghurs genocide. Strong words.
But that...
Then priorities shifted. Economic ties deepened. Later, he's quoted saying, Muslims live happily in China. A complete reversal.
Wow. And Iran?
Similar calculations. Iran has also prioritized its strategic and economic relationship with China. And with Myanmar, Iran actually abstained, refused to vote against a UN resolution condemning the massacres of the Rohingya Muslims.
So when push comes to shove, Beijing or Naypyidaw are more important partners than fellow Muslims facing persecution.
The national interest dictates policy. Pragmatism over religious solidarity. It functions just like any other nation-state in that regard.
So let's try and tie this all together. What's the big takeaway from looking at these sources?
I think the main finding is just how profoundly modern Islamic revivalism, particularly in its political forms, is shaped by the Western nation-state model.
They're products of that model, even while opposing the West.
Yes. Islamists grew up within nationalist cultures. Their interpretations of religion, their political goals they tend to align with, and reinforce their own imagined national communities and borders.
They redraw religious history to fit the nation, not the other way around.
That's a good way to put it. The nation becomes the container, and religion is poured into it, sometimes changing shape in the process.
Okay, so let's just unpack this for you, the listener. The state that Islamists often seek might be called Islamic, but how it actually works.
Its rules about who belongs, who doesn't, its foreign policy based on pragmatic national interest, its linguistic policies.
All of that seems dictated by the modern playbook of limited borders, national economies, and state sovereignty, not really by the universal borderless ideal of the Ummah that's often part of the rhetoric.
Right. The rhetoric might be universal, but the structure is national, and that structure has its own logic.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe something for you to mull over.
Yeah, it raises a pretty fundamental question. If the main way proposed to achieve a truly Islamic life is through this modern nation-state,
In a structure that's inherently about exclusion, borders, and pragmatic self-interest.
can any political movement based on religion truly escape the limitations of the very political structure it relies on? A structure that defines its territory, its citizens, its economy, and ultimately who its friends and enemies are. Can it ever be truly universal when contained within a national box?